So what does the ego have to do with your attachment style? Well, actually, it has a lot to do with it because the ego is always preserving your image. It's very much fear-based. And your attachment style, if it isn't secure, which, by the way, all attachment styles on a sliding scale, and the circumstances that you're in can either reinforce you moving towards secure or move you into an insecure attachment style. And so the insecure attachment styles are all about your protective functions. So they're preserving you in a way that fear also does. And so I want to bring the connection between these two so that you can have a deeper and better understanding about the ego and its function and how it affects your attachment style and your ability to move away from insecure attachment and toward secure attachment. So I'm going to give you the strategic steps that you need to take to do that. But first, if you're new here, I'm Ketra Thompson. And what I do with my clients is I help them get to the heart of what's driving their unwanted behavior because I use a combination of hypnotherapy, mind coaching, relationship, and attachment style coaching to get to the heart of what's driving your unwanted behavior and reframe it subconsciously. So if you'd like to learn more, you can check out the link in the description below where you can set up a completely complimentary consultation call so that you and I can chat. We can get to the heart of what's going on with you because every person is unique in their own way and deserves their own custom work. So check that out, set that up if you'd like to, and you can learn more there. And of course, if this content resonates with you, I really appreciate it if you would click like and subscribe so you can be notified every time that I post a new video, but also the algorithm helps support me in that way. It's a way that you can support me for the complimentary content that I put on YouTube that hopefully is really helpful to you. I'm really busy in my practice, and so having people that acknowledge that and are able to hit that like and subscribe helps me reach more people, especially people who aren't able to or aren't yet in that one-on-one work process. So first, I want to talk about the ego. So what is the ego? Well, the ego is oftentimes called the false self. And it's called the false self because it's built on the belief systems of what we think other people expect of us. And oftentimes that's happening during the subconscious programming, primarily from birth to age 7. And then there are some very significant things that can affect our subconscious programming even after that. But as we grow up, we sort of unconsciously shape our beliefs. And the people around us are part of that as we are assigning meaning to what we experience. And so we try to gain approval or we try to avoid rejection. And we really try to fit into our environment. And the ego learns things like, if I act this way, people will like me. Or if I hide this part of myself, I'll be accepted. Or I need to succeed. I need to look perfect. I need to be strong. I need to be whatever, you fill in the blank, to be loved and accepted. Because as a human being, our greatest need is to be accepted, to belong, and connection with the people in our lives. We just don't survive without it. Human babies are very, very fragile. They can't survive on their own at all. And so any disconnection from our caregiver sends us into panic, but it doesn't stop when we're a baby. We're very tribal beings, and so we need that connection. But the way the ego does it is that instead of expressing your authentic self, staying tuned into your own needs, what we do instead is we construct an identity that's based on approval seeking and what we think the world wants of us. And it's not that that identity is bad. It's just that it keeps you stuck. It keeps you stuck in patterns of pretending and pleasing and performing. And the ego's trying to protect us, but it does it by masking our deeper truth and by stopping our ability to actually be authentic and receive. And so this is all part of the subconscious programming because our subconscious is programmed in a way that is very protective of it. So there is this critical factor, this sort of gatekeeper over the subconscious mind, and it keeps it from receiving new information. And it also keeps you from creating the big shifts that you want to have in life. And so that further develops your attachment style. So let's talk a little bit about the insecure attachment styles and what they look like so that we can really bring this all together. Now, the attachment style we all want to strive for is secure attachment. Secure attachment is not the same thing as commitment or a willingness to stay committed. Secure attachment is when you've let go of the protective functions that are causing you to show up in a certain way that's protective and fear-based. And so secure attachment is really self-compassion and self-love at its deepest form, where you really understand you are loved, you are worthy, and you know how to take good care of yourself. And so we're not going to spend a ton of time on that one because although it's our goal, it's not the one that most people are struggling with. So let's talk about the other attachment styles, which are anxious, they are dismissive avoidant, and they are fearful avoidant. Now, the dismissive avoidant attachment style is when a child's caregiver is sort of emotionally unavailable. They're kind of critical or they're dismissive of the child, rejecting in some way, even if they don't mean to be. They're not connected to their own emotions, and so they aren't nurturing that in their child. And so this person really tries to protect themselves. And so they do this with emotional detachment, and they use that emotional detachment, that distance making, as a protective function. And they often unconsciously express this need for distance. They don't even know they're doing it really. And they learn that expressing emotions, especially vulnerable ones, leads to disappointment. It leads to shame or rejection or being ignored, feeling emotionally abandoned. And so they protect themselves by disconnecting from their own emotional needs, and they keep other people at a distance because they feel safer. So someone with dismissive avoidant attachment style might believe things like, I don't need anyone. I'm fine on my own. Feelings just complicate things. And you can see these are kind of moving away from the core need as a human being for connection. So they also really use hyper-independence as a shield. And so they often value self-reliance, and they do it to an extreme degree that they will not share their thoughts, feelings, needs, and they are also detached from them. And so depending on others actually feels like a risk. They avoid it. And this independence becomes a defense mechanism, thinking if I don't need anyone, then nobody can let me down. And this avoidance of vulnerability is a really big part of that. So being vulnerable means letting someone see the parts of you that they might reject, they might not like. And so instead, the dismissive avoidant avoids emotional conversations. They pull away when things get close, and they downplay their own emotional needs, and they downplay other people's emotional needs, treating it like some kind of burden or dysfunction because it can flood them and overwhelm them. They also rationalize and minimize. And so they might deal with emotional discomfort by intellectualizing it, keeping it up in their brain, not feeling it in themselves, minimizing it also as a thing, and thinking or even saying, it's not a big deal. Who cares? They're just being dramatic. And this helps them stay in control and not feel overwhelmed by emotional feelings or closeness, because those things can feel very big in them. So it's not that these people don't feel, it's that they feel in a big way and they don't know how to handle that flood of feelings. And so the dismissive avoidant is basically very much a protective adaptation. And that inner belief, even if it's not put into words, is very much like feeling and believing closeness feels dangerous. And so I'll stay distant and I'll stay strong and I'll stay safe. It's not true. It doesn't work in their favor, but that's the belief. And so beneath the distance, the reality is there's usually a very deep unmet need for connection, and this person has just learned to suppress it. So I'm sure you can see from that description how much of the ego is involved in this. The ego is fear-based, and the ego is creating this version of you that it thinks the world wants to see. And so in a dismissive avoidant, they oftentimes just present the version they think the world wants to see. So let's talk about the fearful avoidant. Now, the fearful avoidant attachment style has both anxious and avoidant patterns. And so it's really the most complex of the attachment styles. And it's formed really early in life when you're programming that subconscious mind. And it's really a response to relationships that are both a source of love and a source of fear. And so these kinds of relationships involve either physical abuse, emotional abuse, sometimes neglect, oftentimes emotional unpredictability. And so even when you think of like growing up with an alcoholic as a parent who might be very loving, but also very unpredictable, you don't kind of know where they stand, and someone who might have learned to adapt to both of those scenarios, or very different things that they get from each of their parents. And so this style of attachment really tries to protect itself, even though sometimes it might look chaotic, like it doesn't know what it wants, that person. It kind of has this push-pull dynamic. Like, come close, I really want you close, but no, now go away. And the fearful avoidant craves intimacy, but they fear being hurt and abandoned, and they also fear being engulfed. And so that's very similar when we look at the dismissive avoidant, who doesn't want to be engulfed, overwhelmed by the needs of others, which has so much to do with not being able to receive, not knowing what you feel, not being able to implement boundaries, not being able to communicate those things, thinking you have to just go with the flow. This is who I am. I just go with the flow. I don't push back. I don't lead. I don't communicate. And thinking that that's keeping you safe, but really it's keeping you in self-betrayal. And so that's kind of a thing that the dismissive avoidant and the fearful avoidant share sometimes. Now, they'll often reach out for closeness, and then they'll suddenly pull back. They seem intensely loving, but can also become distant or cold. But it's usually triggered by their very tuned in ability to notice changes in their partner. Now, if their partner has some kind of pullback function, then that subconsciously triggers them into their fear and pull away before they get hurt. And so they can also get really overwhelmed by emotional intensity if it's too much at one time, or it's too soon, or they haven't built a foundation for that, both their own emotions and that of their partners. So this push-pull is actually their nervous system trying to balance two threats: the fear of being alone and the fear of being hurt if they let someone in. And so again, they bring up the ego part of them that they think the world wants to see in any given situation. Now, they might open themselves up to being vulnerable when they want closeness, but then the ego takes over when there's any fear of abandonment or rejection or threat, and it pulls way back. And so the ego has a big role in this attachment style as well. So the fearful avoidant is really hypervigilant, always reading for danger, always being able to tell what someone else's moods are. And so you might hear this kind of attachment style related to people who consider themselves very empathetic or empathic. And they've been conditioned during their subconscious programming to be very aware of other people's behaviors, because then they can shift their behavior to control the other people's or to manage it. So they're always managing someone else's emotions. And they are reading the room, reading the moods, reading the actions, reading the tone of voice, and they're scanning for signs of rejection. And so they really are looking for even more than rejection. They're looking for signs of betrayal, signs of abandonment, emotional overwhelm. And it means that they really don't want to be caught off guard. They always want to be prepared. They always want to know ahead of time. These are your perfectionistic people sometimes as well, where they want to be prepared because they don't like being caught off guard. And it can keep them in a constant state of stress, of hypervigilance, of dysregulated nervous system. And so they self-sabotage. They end things before they get too close. They end relationships suddenly. They choose unavailable partners. And they create a level of distrust and maybe even distance making in their relationships also. But it's not like a set, stagnant thing. Our attachment styles is fluid. And so the people we're with either push us one direction or push us the other by their behaviors as well. And we need to be really aware of that and what our ego is doing to try to manage other people and our perception of who we are to other people, like how they're perceiving us. Now, sometimes they have emotional suppression of their own feelings, so they're a little disconnected as well. But other times they might feel overwhelmed. And so this kind of drives their intensity and the confusion around their behaviors. They have shame and unworthiness underneath all that in their programming. And at the core, these fearful avoidants really carry that shame, and it gets transmuted into what their ego becomes in their life, thinking if I get too close, they'll see the real me and they'll leave. So it's sort of that same core wound as the dismissive avoidant, but because they did receive some love, some nurturing, and some care, they are more connected to the ability to receive that and to connect there. But then that fear function comes in and can keep them away. But it's particularly when they notice it in their partner. So they need a lot of consistency and emotional safety to move towards secure attachment. So now I want to talk about the anxious attachment style. I want to give you a good picture of what these all are so we can really get a deep understanding. And the anxious attachment style is also often called preoccupied attachment. And so it protects itself in a very different way. And it's different than the avoidant in that it doesn't pull away to protect, it clings and it holds tightly to the connections it has in its life, believing that closeness is the only way to feel safe and secure. And that closeness is, but what they're missing is the attunement that they need to operate from a place of clarity and security. And so the anxious attacher kind of clings and believes like, don't leave me, don't go. And they really fear abandonment. And their caregivers, their parents, whatever, might have been really inconsistent, sometimes loving them, sometimes distant. And they learned to just hold on really tightly or I might lose you. And they try to protect themselves from that pain of being left by becoming overly involved, dependent in their relationships, really seeking reassurance and closeness on almost an obsessive level. We all need some reassurance. We all need to know the other person loves us, how they feel, that they're there for us, that we're communicating well. But the anxious attacher really needs that a lot. And the more consistently they get it, actually, the easier it is for them to move toward secure attachment as long as they're being self-reflective. They really don't prioritize their own needs. They put the focus on prioritizing everyone else's needs so those people don't leave. And they are also someone who really reads the room. The same way the fearful avoidant does. Because remember, the fearful avoidant has both the avoidant and the anxious parts to them. And so they're able to attune to other people's emotions, their behaviors. They watch for signs of pulling away, and they're hypervigilant, trying to have this emotional self-protection of if I can catch it early enough, I can press in and make sure this person doesn't leave. And so they really can spot early shifts in a relationship very easily and think they can stop that other person from leaving. But it leads to overthinking, misreading signals, and really a constant anxiety. So the anxious attacher can use protest behaviors. Now, if they feel distance or a fear of abandonment, they might unconsciously try to reestablish that connection with excessive texting, obsessive calling, acting out with big reactions like overblown jealousies, not questions and curiosity. They might really withdraw, actually, sometimes if they think there's valid evidence for that. They might make themselves needed to feel secure. If they can make themselves needed and valuable to people around them, then those people will just appreciate them so much that they'll never leave. And they really try to reignite closeness. And because that's their main goal without it being balanced out by their own needs, by their own self-reflective patterns, or by understanding what their partner is doing or needing, then that can kind of push people away if it's too much. So if it's a little, questioning or asking for reconnection and you're dealing with a dismissive avoidant, that's going to really push them away. If you're dealing with a really secure person, they're going to understand that they need to move toward you and create reconnection in the process. So all of this anxiety can really lead to feeling like they have low self-worth, like they need that external validation. They really deep down might think, if you leave, it means I'm not enough. And so they try to protect themselves, and the ego comes up and tries to be what it thinks the world wants it to be. Oftentimes, these are the people who will stay in dysfunctional relationships far too long because they don't want to be alone. And they have this fear of being alone. They really associate being alone with danger or abandonment or not being able to do it on their own. And they might jump from one relationship to another, or stay in those really unhealthy dynamics to just avoid the pain of solitude, to avoid the pain of having to do it alone. And it causes them to seek connection with people who aren't really aligned for them or that aren't healthy for them. So let's circle back to the ego. Now, the ego is always basing its decisions on fear. And so when you're dealing with a fear-based process, that means that both the anxious and the avoidant, both types of attachment style, are operating out of fear-based thinking and protective thinking. And the ego is always afraid of death. But not just the physical death, which it is afraid of that usually, but also other little deaths. Death to how it's propped itself up to believe that the world sees it a certain way. So that death might manifest into a fear of rejection or judgment. And those little deaths to the ego are messages that say what you did wasn't good enough. The you that you created wasn't good enough. Nobody loves you. And so what we can do is what I want to get to next. Is the problem with the ego is that it takes things very personally. It gets damaged very quickly and hurt and defensive, and then projects, blames, isn't willing to look at itself, isn't willing to learn a new way. It just gets very protective. And so the way we sort of combat that is that we have to let go of our own self-condemnation, and that requires healing. And so the authentic self is open, is curious, is patient, and does not take other people's behaviors personally. And that is what it looks like to truly be connected to your self-worth. When you're focused on love, on authenticity, on letting go of control of things around you, people around you. It's not afraid of the micro deaths of judgment. It's a full acceptance of self. And so this healing pattern involves building trust with yourself, learning emotional regulation tools, creating safe and stable relationships, implementing healthy boundaries, vulnerable communication, even including being authentic and vulnerable with yourself. But how do we do that? If the ego is controlling that, how do you actually connect to your divine authentic self? Well, you've got to break through the protective function. And what our subconscious mind is protected by is this protective function. And the subconscious mind is running over 95% of everything you think, feel, and do. So it's absolutely in control, but it was programmed during a time in your life when you did not have understanding or discernment. And it's programmed by your perceptions, not your adult perceptions, not the way that you can think, well, I get why they said or did that. Oh, I forgave those people. It was programmed without that discernment, with the very fragile young version of you that needed things and didn't get them, and created beliefs around the pain of those unmet needs that might be, I'm not good enough, I didn't deserve that. I'm not worthy of it. I was bad. And those beliefs are in that subconscious mind still running the show. And so the quickest way to get to the heart of that so you can actually connect to your self-worth is that deep hypnotherapy custom work of getting to the heart of your specific programming and doing that reframing work, and then stepping into the implementation of showing up in the world in a new way, in a way that allows you to actually receive. Because whenever we make a request of someone else, whenever we share our thoughts, share our feelings, share our needs, if we can't receive what we're asking for, it bounces off of us. Like we're surrounded by a bubble, just the way that like a compliment that someone gives you that you don't receive, it's that guard over your subconscious mind going, hey, this doesn't line up with my programming. Reject that, get it out of here. And it bounces right off. And so if you think you can tune into the point of asking for what you need, but then you don't know how to actually receive it, that's a big problem. And it will keep you focusing on people that require you to create an external focus on how you can please them to get what you want, instead of understanding what you need clearly and communicating it so you can actually receive. So it's not as simple as just telling yourself you want something to change, because you don't really have access to that subconscious mind. And so doing that deep subconscious work is the quickest, most profound, and longest lasting way to address these needs and to get that ego out of the way. The ego thinks it's protecting you, but it's not. It's keeping you from the life that you want. It's keeping you from receiving the love that you want, the abundance that you want, the success that you want, the peace of mind that you want. And so when we really connect to the divine, authentic self, that self knows you're loved, knows you were created in love, is secure in it, not just in your conscious mind, but deeply in your subconscious, in your soul. The ego and the soul are not operating the same way. The soul is the authentic you that has known its worth from the beginning, has known that it never needed to earn validation from other people. It has always been worthy. And the ego is the protective function saying, let me show up the way the world told me I should show up so that I can get love. But all the while I need to deny myself, betray myself, stay disconnected from myself, my own feelings, my own thoughts, my own needs. And it robs you. It robs you of your ability to receive. And so, of course, the subconscious work is the fastest way. But if you want to do some things on your own, I recommend that you just start getting curious about the belief systems. What is the narrative? What are you telling yourself when these things come up and you get frustrated? What are you doing when other people say and do things that make you feel uncomfortable? Do you have a process of pulling away? I recommend you take a time out, you process what you're feeling, you ask yourself, what am I feeling? When is the first time I felt that way under the age of 18? And is this feeling valid for this moment, or is it really an old trigger that's coming up? And then you can start moving toward that other person again, where you go, hey, when this happened, I really felt this way. And I don't think that's about you. And I don't think you intended for me to feel that way. So in the future, could we do this instead? Or could you help me get clarity on this? I'm going to be vulnerable here and really just ask for what I need or share that with you. And you create an opportunity for the other person to hold space for you, or you create an opportunity where you find out they can't hold space for you. And that's just as valuable, because when you realize that you're collecting data about the safety of the other people, instead of using that subconscious programming to collect data and then change you to morph into this ego person, you can actually do it from a place of vulnerability where you go, okay, now I see that I can request for them to meet me in the middle here and grow with me and learn with me and shift with me. And if they can't, that tells me something too. They're probably not a safe person to confide in or grow with or move forward with. And so you're always collecting data, but if the filter you're reading that data through is the ego, it's going to be a very different reaction than if it's the authentic self. So I hope that was helpful to you. And we're not trying to kill the ego as much as we're trying to make sure that it knows it can drop its protective functions. It can let its guard down, embrace the real, authentic, divine you. And part of that is calming the nervous system in conjunction with the subconscious reprogramming, because the nervous system is acting very quickly before we put any conscious thought into our behaviors. So again, if you would like to have that deep subconscious reprogramming and one-on-one help, and get to the heart of this, because time is the one thing you can't get back. It's passing no matter what. And when we decide, I'm sick of my life going the way that it's been going, and I'm ready to invest in myself, that's when these shifts happen. So if you'd like to learn more, set up that consultation call and let's chat about it. And of course, once again, if this resonates with you, I really appreciate it if you click like and subscribe so you can be notified every time I post a new video. And until next time, I hope you curate a life by your own design.